In this tutorial, we're going to be looking at composite image making. This is all about the idea that you can build a photograph out of many separate images, collaging them almost using Photoshop. So you're creating digital collages and you can take elements of the same scene from slightly different times and rework them, or you can totally break the rules and take elements from lots of different photo shoots and pull those together and create these entirely new imagined views and realities. As well as me talking you through my images quickly now and showing how they've evolved over time, I'm also going to give a full demonstration on how you can create your own invisible person. So it's using Photoshop, using multiple images, and you hopefully by the end of this should be able to work out how to create your own invisible person. So I'm going to just flick through a few images now, and this is a kind of way of showing how my composite image making has evolved over time. This first one is a really early one when I first got a digital camera, and I was just starting to experiment with these ideas. You can kind of date it by the Nokia phone that's sort of in front of me hanging in the air. So yeah, it's one of my first where I did experiment with these ideas, but very quickly these ideas really evolved. So here's another one, maybe only 6-7 months later, which is much more sophisticated. But the reason I wanted to have this set of images at the start is to show how once you start playing with these ideas, things can evolve really quickly. You can take it in your own direction. So once you've kind of had a bit of a go at it, it's almost your imagination that can lead you. So here's some more which are kind of experimenting with this idea of an invisible person, but sometimes leaving elements. This is a person raised off the ground in moorlands in Scotland. So it's all about taking pictures of people but then slightly reworking them, working into the colours. And these are quite early ones, but then again they evolved. This ended up being a book cover, so fairly quickly after developing my own work I was being commissioned to create these similar kind of composite images. And then I came up with this idea of exploring Manchester in a kind of science fiction type way, so almost destroying the city. This first one, which is unfortunately I can only find quite a low res version of it, was a test to kind of imagine what the inside of a building would look like. And then in time I went all around Manchester and kind of imagined the inside of buildings and created this kind of strange aftermath. I emptied the cities, so you've just got these buildings, these kind of strange buildings with these big voids in. And this is another one, a walkway near the universities. So they're quite surreal, quite sci-fi, and I deliberately degraded the image to give them this sense that you're almost looking through video footage or something like that, found footage. Here's the last one, which was probably the most ambitious from this series, where I moved the sun and put it behind the building. I really love this idea that the hole could be an aperture for the sun to kind of come through. So you've got this sunlight kind of drifting through this strange hole in the building in Manchester. And that led to other ideas, these images using hallways and kind of playing around with this black space as a really solid background. This is a hallway in Berlin. And then that expanded again to this image here, which is the inside of St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican in Rome. And this is built out of hundreds of photographs and took me around about a year. It's full of detail when you see the full res. When you see it this size, you probably can't quite tell what you're looking at. But this evolved. The thing is, all this slowly evolved from playing around with making myself invisible at home, little experiments with in the park, and then it slowly in time it evolved. Here's another image, it's a black space one of these kind of windows floating in space, so it almost becomes a pattern, or like when you see pictures of DNA structure that's been recorded. And here's some now working on a kind of white space. So this is a companion piece to the image before. They're designed to kind of fill the screen in a similar way, but one be on a black background and the other on a white. And here's another working with that white space. This is the City Tower in Manchester. And I went back a few years later and photographed it again, so you can see the skin of the buildings updated and changed. But then that evolved, that went in whole new directions, and I ended up creating this image of an airport in Hong Kong and really going into the detail. I had to imagine what those reflections would look like underneath people, had to cut out all the objects, create shadows. So it's really good fun, and it's amazing once you start using your imagination what you can create from your home studio. You shouldn't be limited. You can take the real world and you can rework it to be what you want. After destroying cities, I decided to start creating cities. So this is my Sealand image, which is based on a place called Sealand, which is off the Essex-Suffolk coast, but this is me imagining it if it turned into its own city-state. And it's built out of elements from about 20 different photo shoots, building from Manchester, Liverpool, chemical works from the outskirts of Manchester, loads of different elements. The sky was from marshland, over Essex. You can see how it's evolved from that first image I showed you of me just sat on the bed, invisible, right through to this. But these same techniques, the same idea of copying and pasting, transforming, so you change the scale of images, dropping in lots of layers, which I'm going to talk about in the Photoshop demo. The ideas I'm going to show you in this demo are what I used to create this. There's maybe a few other little ideas in there, but the basics of bringing in lots of images into the same composition, resizing them, cutting them out carefully, and then positioning them, and then just working on the color is basically what I'm going to show you in the tutorial. It's up to you to then run with that and take it in whatever direction you want, and you can see this is the direction I took it. And then using the same ideas to create this kind of painterly landscape of well, seascape, I guess, of a boat on the ocean. This is built out of sunsets from Yorkshire, a boat from near Whitby, the waves from near Whitby, the boat was from near Cork in Ireland. And then I decided to create whole new worlds almost. This is a kind of painted version of the Earth, which I photographed and dropped onto this kind of created starscape. But that's led to other ideas like these floating rock formations, which are built out of, this is built out of a place called Calpe in Spain, and Ifac, a rock that sits over it, which is the rock that's you can see beneath, the kind of green rock. And then this is another one that's kind of floating through space, made out of an observatory in Edinburgh, roots of trees and a kind of cloudscape from a plane window. So it's so good, so much good fun. Once you start building these things, you can just take them in so many directions. This is made out of photographs from Kennedy Space Center and images I created of the Earth and lights. I tried to imagine cities. Then I created this, I went right back in time. You've got the space age, and then you're right back to prehistory with the dinosaurs. So this is using plants I saw in real world gardens in Cornwall, and then I bought the dinosaurs off the internet, but then kind of lit them in just the right way and added to their texture, and they came out really nicely. It kind of created this strange imagined prehistoric scene. And then this is another commission piece I did for the BBC Philharmonic. So this was for a Wagner concert, and it's using rock formations from Wales, the Peak District, castles from Monmouthshire, a tree from near Chatsworth. That's me on the horse there. There's a whole, that was almost a standalone project, creating the horse rider, which was good fun. And sometimes you can go down a rabbit hole. I would say this one is a rabbit hole where I just kind of possibly went a bit too far and created such a churning, strange landscape. It's almost kind of indecipherable. So you can sometimes go a little bit too far, but that's great. I think it's good to go too far because you know you're pushing what you do. You know you're taking it in different directions. And then a final one, this is one of the last ones of these I've created, built out as a South Stack lighthouse in Anglesey, and then lots of caves and rock formations from Snowdonia and Peak District and the Lake District, all built together. And they take a long time. These ones do, but the invisible person you should be able to achieve in maybe 2 or 3 hours if it's the first time you've done it. But these ones maybe take me weeks, months even, amongst other projects, because you literally have to pull everything together, cut it all out. But by spending so much time on them, you can just create these totally imagined worlds, and it's so satisfying. So we're going to move on now to the tutorial, how you create an invisible person. I hope that's useful, and thanks for looking at these images. So we've looked at some of my composite images there, and also the invisible photography, the invisible person image, which is what we're going to be doing in this tutorial. So it's very basic. The idea of this is we take 2 images, one of a person stood there, and then the second image of exactly the same background with no one in. So you see there we've got 2 separate images, and then we overlap those images, and where the person's arm is or the person's legs are, which is why I'm wearing shorts, you see right through to what's behind. So that's the basics of it. You've got 2 images you put on top of each other, and then you just erase where the hand is. So let me just do a very quick demo of that. If I stand perfectly still, you've got me stood there, and then slowly I will paint out my hand, my other hand, my legs and my head, and you suddenly have an invisible person, just a close. Okay, I'm back now, so this is really me. I'm going to show you how to do that photographically. That was just a bit of a silly little fun way of doing it in the video. Couple of things to think about before you get onto the photography stage, and that is what you wear. So I am wearing shorts, which I don't always wear, because that gives you more to get rid of. So we can get rid of that gap there, and suddenly you've got me floating as well, which adds to the kind of illusion, which is quite good fun. and then you can see your arms there, and a hat's quite good as well. So as you'll see, I'll get rid of my head and suddenly you've got this floating hat. So it adds to the illusion and it makes it a little bit cooler. You could hold something as well. I'm probably not going to be holding anything here, but you could hold a phone, you could hold anything, an umbrella. You could just be sort of playful with it. So if you're holding something, then it's just kind of hovering there in the air as well. One other thing to think about that people often think about too late is hair as well. So if you happen to have long hair, don't have that hair going in front of your clothes, because that will obscure your clothes, and suddenly what are you going to do with that hair? It needs to go behind the clothes, otherwise you just have this kind of disembodied hair floating there. And also, when you're doing your pose, which we'll talk about in a second, don't have your hand in front of you, because that confuses things. Try and have your hands out to the side. It's good to have a pose where you've got a bit of movement to it, so you can kind of do an exaggerated pose, a little bit of an odd pose. It's kind of a bit better than just doing all straight. Just pick your foot up off the ground. That can be good fun as well. So think about the position as well. So yeah, and then once you've thought about that, clothes you're wearing, hair, position, you're ready to shoot, and we'll move on to that next. So we're ready to shoot now. I'm doing this on my own, so I'm going to be using self-timer to do it, but if you've got someone who can help you with the camera, with shooting, you don't need to worry about self-timer. I've set mine as a 10-second self-timer, so as soon as I hit the button on the camera, I've got 10 seconds to rush to this point here, do my pose, and then it takes a picture, and then I go back to the camera, and I take that exact same image again, but without me in it, so you just see that background, because that's the thing we're going to be seeing through to. We're going to be getting rid of the hands and kind of getting it so we just got the clothes there. So first thing that's important is if you have access to a tripod for this kind of shot, it's really useful, because it means those two images you take with me and without me are exactly the same. The background is in exactly the same position, or very, very close, which means you don't have to move the images around. They should, because you haven't moved the camera, those two photographs should sit perfectly on top of each other. So there's no offsetting, everything in the background looks really close, and that helps you, that saves you a lot of work later. You can prop your camera on the top of a wall, but be careful not to move it when you do the second exposure, or you can even have someone handhold it, but then when you're in Photoshop, those two images with and without a person, you have to dodge around, move around, transform the position slightly just to get them overlapping neatly, so that when you see through to the back behind them, it all aligns kind of nicely. But a tripod's really useful. If you can borrow one for this, that's great, but you don't necessarily need one, and you can do it on a mobile phone as well. You can do this simply and easily, but a tripod is handy if you've got it. So yeah, once you've got your camera nice and steady, you're ready to then do the exposures. I'm going to talk about those and do those in stills now. I won't be able to do a video of those because while they're happening, I can't be filming, so hopefully this makes sense when it's played back. Okay, so I'm back at my camera now. For a while the screen is going to be black because I'm just going to be setting my camera up, and then I'll be moving over and taking the stills, so it's in still setting. So I hope this makes a little bit of sense. The important thing is, once you've got your camera on a tripod nice and steady, is to use manual exposure if you can. You can do this with auto exposure, but manual exposure means those two images with and without me are exactly the same brightness, so they should sit on top of each other really nicely and really easily when you take the image. I've previously done a video on how to use manual exposure on a camera with manual settings. There's a link to that below. It tells you basically how to work between your ISO, your aperture and your shutter speed to choose a good exposure to capture the detail nicely. So the first thing you do before you take a picture of yourself to be turned invisible is find your good exposure. So I'm just using my camera now. I've gone for an ISO of about 250, so it's nice and detailed. I've gone for an aperture of f8, so it's got quite a good depth of field. And now I'm just shooting and getting it so it's a brightness that I like. So I'm ending up with an exposure on this bright sunny day of, let's have a look, of 500ths of a second, so quite a quick exposure because it's so lovely and sunny. So now I'm ready to do the shot. So I'm putting my camera on to 10-second self-timer setting, and as soon as I press a button I'm going to rush into the shot, and I'm going to hold a strange position, and that will be the picture of me, which I can then make myself invisible from. So I'm walking over that way now. I'm assuming a slightly odd position, and you'll see a still of this in a second. I'm making sure my hands don't overlap. If I had long hair, I'd make sure it's behind my shoulders. and there's your photograph of me. And then the next stage is really simple. You just take exactly the same photograph, but this time without anyone in at all, so just the plain background. And it's about to do that. My camera's on self-timer, so it's taken a while, but there you go, you hear it. So that's the second exposure without me in. And then you're ready to start your composite work, but there's one other point which needs to be thought about, so try and watch the whole video. I'm not going to talk about it here because it will make more sense logically once we get to the end of the video. So once I've shown you how to get rid of the limbs, you should see inside the clothes. We're going to, once we've got rid of the limbs, rewind to this point and take a few more photographs so we have details to drop in on the inside of the clothes. So watch the whole video because there is that extra bit which helps you create the illusion towards the end. So we're now looking at the photographs we took outside in Photoshop. So this is a software we use made by Adobe to put the images together. So you'll notice there we've got the images to the center of the screen, and then to the right we've got something called the layer palette. Layer palette's really important in this tutorial, and understanding how that works is very important if you want to get into creative retouching. So we'll be looking at that in a bit of detail later. But to start with, we'll look at the images. We've got both images here. Sometimes when Photoshop opens them, it puts them in tabs, so it kind of locks them together like when you have tabs in a browser or something like that. So what you need to do first is pull it out of the tabs so you can see your images separately. And now I'm just going to use my zoom tool. I'm just going to make them a little bit smaller in the screen just so we can see what we're dealing with. Okay, so we've got the two images. We've got the image with the empty background, we've got the image with me in, and we've got the layer palette. So if I move between the images, you can see each image has one layer. So in the case of both images, it's called background. Now, if we click on the image of me, and if we go select all, and then if we go edit, copy, then it's remembered that image to the computer. And now if we move across and click on the empty image and we go edit, paste, then it copies me on top of that. And as you can see, if we now look over the layer palette, it looks a little bit different. You've got your background layer, which is the one that was there already, which is the empty image. But now it's dropped another layer on top of that, which is the layer with me in. So we've done that so we can close this image, the image with me, and we can just focus on this for now. So yeah, we have our layer palette is starting to take a bit of shape. It's a little bit hard to get your head around what the layer palette's telling you. It took me a little bit of time, so I'm going to try and do a slight sort of real world demo amongst all this just so you can understand. You need to think of the layer palette as almost sheets of paper. So the background layer is the layer that's the sheet of paper that's nearest the bottom of the screen. So it's the lowest in that list. That means it's a piece of paper that all the other pieces of paper in the layer palette will sit on top of. In this case, there's only one other layer there, which is layer 1, the one with me in. And if we turn that off by clicking on the eye, you see through to the layer that's sitting behind it, and it's sitting behind it because it's lower in the layer palette. So I'm just going to show this in a little cutaway section now. We've got the two images here, which I've printed out. And because the image with no one in is your background layer, I'm going to stick that on the table because that's the lowest layer. That's the lowest down the layer palette, and layer 1 is going to sit on top of that. So that's this stack of paper. You need to get that in your head that layers are like a stack of paper. And at the moment we've only got 2 layers, but we could, if we wanted, put 100 layers in there. Some images I've worked on have had so many layers, like 50 or 60, maybe even 100 or 150. But even when you've got 100 layers in there, that rule is true. Whichever layer is the lowest down on that list, whichever layer is nearest the bottom of the screen is the layer that sits at the bottom of the pack, and then it goes on like that. So they kind of weave in and out of each other. So once you've got 5 layers, the one in the middle will be below the 2 layers above it and above the 2 layers below it, so that order stands no matter how many layers you've got. Whichever is highest is above all the layers beneath it, if that makes sense. I hope it does. So we've got our layers in order, so we've deliberately put the empty background there and me on top. I'm just going to quickly turn off that empty background. This is what Photoshop looks like when there's no image there at all. I'm going to turn on the picture of me, layer 1, and then I'm going to go to the erase tool and I'm going to eat a hole in that layer. So you can see there the cross hatching because I'm erasing and we're seeing through to the layer behind. So This is one way of, this is probably the more simple way of doing this method. So if I get make the brush a tiny bit smaller and we open that background layer, so I'm going to my layer palette again and I'm turning that background layer on. Now if I erase that top layer, because that background layer has just been turned on, we're not seeing back to nothing, we're seeing back to the image beneath it where there's no one in, so we can see the trees and the bushes behind me and we can start to create the illusion of an invisible person. So that's the way you do it with the erase tool. If I turn off the background layer, you can see we're just basically eating a hole in that top layer and seeing through to that bottom layer. But I don't want to teach you that way because there's a more powerful way of using Photoshop, which is layer masks. So I'm going to undo a few, so I'm going to do Command Z and bring those limbs back, and then I'm going to create a layer mask. So if we look at the layer palette on the right, and then if our eyes go right down to the bottom of that layer palette, we've got about 7 icons. The third one in is a white square with a black circle in. That creates a layer mask. If I click on that, you can now see the top layer, so the layer with me in, has now got a perfectly white box next to it, and that is our layer mask. So if we now look at that, and I'll show you how that works. So at the moment that's purely white, so that's me, I'm telling Photoshop to make everything in the image that 100% visible, because that's 100% white. But if I now go to the brush tool in the toolbar over here, and if I make that blush, make sure that brush is black, and then if I make it a little bit bigger, and then if I'm going to turn off that background layer again so you can really see what it's doing. So the background layer is turned off, so we've just got that front layer, and I've got my brush and I'm clicked on the layer mask, excuse me, and now I can eat a hole in it. It looks like I'm using the erase tool. I'll eat a couple of big holes in that image, and then if we look up here at our layer mask at the top of the layer palette, you can see now there's 2 black shapes on the layer mask. That's me telling Photoshop to make the area in the image that the layer mask is associated with, so this is the image it sits next to. It's me telling Photoshop to make those areas 100% invisible, so it basically eats a hole in them, so you're seeing behind. And why do we use layer mask and not the erase tool? Well, what's brilliant about layer mask is it's non-lossy, is the kind of the technical term, but basically let me show you what I mean by that. If I now get a white brush, so my brush is white and not black, and I paint on that layer mask, both layer masks, and then we look up here at the layer palette again, look at the top layer, you can see that layer, the layer mask has now got white on. So at any stage, as long as I've saved my image as a layered image, and as long as I've saved it in the right way, so it's got layers and layer masks as it's saved, I can work on an image for weeks and go back and that detail's still there. I can go and get it if I want, which is very useful because you can do things like you can make rough selections to see how the effect's going. So I'm going to get a black brush again. Ooh, let me just do that. I'm going to get a black brush and I'm going to, let me turn on that background layer. So I've just turned on the empty layer, and now if I get a brush, I can very quickly get rid of the hands. I don't need to be too precise. And if I want, if I've been a bit too scruffy and I've gone over the arms a bit, I can get a white brush, so click on that and make it white, and I can bring that detail back. So I might bring a bit more detail there just because I thought I was losing some. So that detail's there, you're just telling Photoshop through layer mask what to show of it. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit more now because we're going to do the actual retouch. So let me get my brush tool and let me make that black, which means we're painting black on the layer mask, and then let me make that brush a lot smaller so it's really detailed, and we can get rid of the arm or the hands, and because I've got a small brush I can do it very neatly. If I want, and I've gone a bit too far, I've made a bad selection, I can get a white brush and I can just bring a bit of that detail back. And now I'm going to hold the space bar down. If I hold the space bar down and click, I can move around the image. And now I'm going to make that brush black again, and then I'm just going to quickly get rid of that arm, and then I'm going to hold the space bar down again, and I'm going to do a much more precise selection. I'm just going to make my brush a tiny bit smaller around the legs, the lovely close-up of the legs, which I'm sure everyone... Oh, I've gone too far, so now I'm going to make my brush white again, and we can bring that detail back, and then I'll make it black again, and we can start eating away at it again. I'm just moving around that image, and we can slowly, very carefully, get rid of all the bits where you see my head and body. So I'm going to do this really quick. I'm not going to do it precisely because you don't want to be sitting there watching it all in slowly, so I just move very quick. I'm just going to go around the top edge of there, and then I just need to go up to the head in a second. So okay, where's the head? So you want to get rid of all the bits where you can see yourself. So I'm going to go around the rim of the hat, I'm going to get rid of the ears, I'm going to get rid of the neck, right up to the edge of the t-shirt. You might notice that this image of me is a little bit out of focus. I blame this on the fact that I'm making these videos all on my own, so it's a little bit hard to absolutely double check everything, but that really isn't a brilliant excuse. But anyway, it doesn't really matter, it's kind of sharp enough for the demo. So I've got rid of me, and we're just going to zoom back using the zoom tool, and you can see we've just got the clothes there. There's some fun things you can do if you want, where you actually look at the shadow as well. So where you've got the hand over here, you could get your black brush, make it a bit bigger so it's got a soft edge. The bigger, if you keep that edge soft, and you can just paint away. Oh, let me just make that a little bit smaller. Paint away the legs a little bit to create a little kind of pretend shadow at the top of the shoes. Again, I'm doing this really quickly, so it's not brilliant, but so the shadow works as well. That's quite a fun little addition to the technique. So I'm just going to zoom back. So it works really well. We've got rid of me. Oh, that shadow could be a bit more, could make a bit more sense. So let me just bring that back a bit with the, okay, the shadows are a bit weird, but that doesn't really matter. So we've got rid of the person. There's something that's not working though, which is something I half mentioned earlier, which is you need to see inside the clothes. At the moment, you should see the back of that collar. If you want the sense of an invisible person in there, you want the clothes to be rounded and full. So we're going to do a quick rewind to the point where I photographed myself stood there and then the empty background. I'm going to show you a little bit about how to capture the insides of the clothes, and then we're going to come forward again, and we're going to do the final touches. We're going to drop those details of the clothes in. It's good if I've split up these two bits of the demo just to not overwhelm you. I wanted to kind of show you the problem before showing you the solution and going back and photographing those bits. But try and photograph the person there, the person not there, the empty background, and the inside of the clothes all at the same time, because then the light will be consistent. So I hope you've watched the tutorial in one go. So just remember to do that all at the same time, even though I've broken it up in the tutorial, because then you'll find the light works and you can kind of, it makes your life a lot easier. You don't have to make things lighter or darker. So yeah, we're going to rewind now to the point where we do the inside of the clothes. So we've just rewound back through the video. We've sat on the computer and we've got rid of the limbs, and we've just got the clothes floating there. But then, as I mentioned, there's a mistake that you can't see. You want to see inside certain bits of the clothes, so you want to see what's behind there, which obviously you can't do because that's impossible. So we need to take a few extra photographs to drop in. So I'm going to take my shirt off. Basically what we need to do at this stage is just carefully photograph a little bit of the inside of your clothes. So in this case we just need a little bit of that there, which might be the back of it, and we'll take a picture of that. So click of the camera, and then also you might see the back of the collar, so just hold it really carefully, try and keep your hands hidden behind it like that, and just shape it a little bit like there's a human in it, and take a picture of that. So the click of the camera, and then there might be other places as well, the back of the socks, the inside of the shorts depending on where you're standing, or even the kind of back of the cap. So you can photograph those elements, hopefully in the same lighting, so you do them at the same time as the first one, and then in Photoshop we can cut those elements out and we can drop them in place. We can transform them, do a little bit of erasing or layer masking just to kind of position them carefully, and that is what really completes the illusion. That final last touch can be really nice. So yeah, this last stage is all about showing what's inside the clothes to create that kind of rounded, full, invisible person. So that should be it, hopefully. We'll move back to the computer and show you how to drop those in now. Okay, so we're back inside now. We've got all the elements we need to finish this project. We've got the elements from the first section where we've got the body and the background, and we've did the work earlier where we use a layer mask to get rid of the body so you can see right through, and we've got rid of all the limbs. But we needed that sense of the clothes inside, so I've got that image open and then also the clothes beneath us here. So I'm going to now show you how to drop in those elements from inside the clothes. I'm going to start off with a bit of the sleeve because that's a nice one to start with. I'm just going to zoom into that a little bit. So that's the sleeve I want to use. If I go to the marquee tool, which is in your toolbar, that bar there, and at the top right there's a marquee tool, and if I select that little area, we don't need the whole image here, just a little area, and go edit, copy, and now we can close that image, then go to our main image and go edit, paste, and suddenly we've got a third layer, which is the first time we've seen that. Usually we've just had two up till now. We've got 3 layers because that layer of the cuff now sits on top of the other 2. Again, the layer order is really important. If I move this to here, and then if I drop that underneath layer 1, you can see it's sandwiched between the 2 layers. So layer 1 sits on top of it, but it still sits on top of the background layer. So it's that idea that the lower you get in the layer palette, on the right here, the nearer the bottom of the screen the layer is, that's the piece of paper that sits at the bottom of the stack. So as we brought in a new layer, it's always quite good to keep that on top. Otherwise it gets a bit confusing if it sits a bit lower down. You're getting a little bit of a muddle while you're getting used to it. So try and keep that on top, and then when you bring the next one in, have that one on top, and then sometimes they all get in slightly weird places, so that helps you think clearly about them, which is good. So we've got that layer on top. I'm now going to put my opacity down to 50% so we can see through that. The opacity control is at the top of the layer bar. I'm on that, the layer palette, I'm on that layer. So now we can see through that, and if I move that around, you can see using the move tool we can sort of position it, but it's way too big. I think I photographed it a bit near the camera. So if we go to the edit menu, we've got a whole section called transform, and in there you've got things like scale, where you can make it bigger and smaller. I'm just going to undo these as I go through them just as a demo. Rotate, whereas if you click outside the box you can spin it. This is when it gets really fun because you can basically take things and resize them, make them big. You can skew them, twist them, make them go very strange shapes. So I'm going to use a combination of skewing, maybe a little bit of rotating just to kind of align it, and then I think it definitely needs a bit of scaling. There is something called free transform, which if you really spend a lot of time in Photoshop, is worth putting a little bit of time into using. It's basically all of these commands at one time via keyboard shortcuts. So it's much quicker, much more intuitive. You don't have to keep going in to edit, and it's a bit laborious doing that. But I'm not going to show you that straight away because it's good just to see the mechanics of it, see what you're doing before you learn the kind of fine detail of how to control it. So I've got that roughly in position. I'm going to go to the bottom of my layer palette again, and I'm going to click on the third one in, the white square with the black circle, and that creates a layer palette on this image here. And now if I put that back up to 100% opacity so it's fully visible, and I get myself a brush, make it a bit smaller than that, make it about 10, and I can slowly start cutting away the rubbish that I don't need. So me holding it, the slightly weird positioned wheelbarrow, and we just start to get rid of all of that, similar to how we got rid of the legs before. So we're just tidying up around it a little bit. I'm doing this quite roughly, and if it was to be for a client or for one of my big pictures, I'd spend a lot more time doing this, but because it's a tutorial, I'm kind of rattling through it, so you pick up the theory and hopefully do it a bit neater yourself once you've got an understanding of what you're up to. So it's getting there. So now if we go back to a brush, and we just need to now, if you can turn your layers on and off a little bit, see where that actual cuff is. It's somewhere here, the actual real cuff of the sleeve, and we can just keep using it and just line it up. Try and, sometimes you tell slight lies, slightly rework it so it feels right. It doesn't have to be perfect. Do it by eye. I think good Photoshop is all about doing it by eye, what looks right, what feels right, and that doesn't feel too bad. So I'm just going to make my brush a little bit smaller. There we go, and just tidy up that edge and just try and get it so it feels like the fabric of what from one image feels like it's handing over to the other. Yeah, that's okay, I think that's not too bad. There is a slight problem which is caused by me getting everything out of focus, in that sleeve that I'm introducing is much sharper than the rest. So if I click on the not on the layer mask of that top layer, so we're looking at the layer palette again, but on the actual image, I can then do things like go into the filters and find Gaussian blur, and I can just give it a little bit of a blur to kind of match it. That's about right. So it feels like it was from the same time. And then also it maybe looks like it's getting a bit too much light hitting it, so I click on it, and if we go to the image, we've got adjustments, brightness and contrast. We could just nudge the brightness down a little bit, make it feel like you're looking into something dark. Excuse me. So that's how one sleeve's done. I'm going to do a sock now. I'm just going to do one more bit, and then we'll do a nice kind of fast forward through all the other elements, because you don't want to sit watching me do this all day. So I'm going to select that sock. From there I'm going to go edit, copy, I'm going to find the image I want to drop it in, so that's there. I'm going to zoom right in, paste, there it is, it's looking good. Again, it's good to keep it at the top layer, so we're back looking at the layer palette. It's top layer, I know it's not going to slide under any other layers, it's not going to sort of semi-disappear underneath that layer, so the top means it's that top piece of paper, all the other pieces of papers are below it. Put my opacity at 50%, so it's see-through, so we can position it, and I'll use the move tool to get it roughly in place, and then the transform tool to scale it. I think it only needs scaling, this one, so it just needs to be a bit wider. You can just about see the other one underneath to kind of guide it in. That's about right, maybe a little bit. You don't need to see that quite so much. So that looks okay. So I've positioned it, opacity back up to 100, and then I'll click on my layer mask, and then I'll zoom in a little bit and get myself a brush. If it's black, I know that because I'm painting on the layer mask, I'm getting rid of stuff. So there we go. I'll be careful when I'm close to it. You can swap between the colours by hitting the X, so I can swap between the black and the white and getting rid of the image and keeping it. So I'm just going to move it over a little bit. We're using the move tool. There we go. And then let's just see where that sock is going to. So the original sock's there, and I think I've gone a bit big. I need to make my sock I'm introducing a bit smaller, so I'm just going to go to around about there. You can scale afterwards, you haven't made all your decisions, so that's about right. Now I know that if I get my brush tool back again, make it black, and get rid of all the stuff I don't need, so all that silliness that's around it. Make my brush a bit bigger just to get rid of everything around it. So there we go. And we've got that showing there. Again, I've got the issue with it being a bit too sharp because the rest of it was in focus. So I'm just going to go into that layer, move from the layer mask to the layer, go to my filters and click blur and just do that by eye. And there you go, that feels really good, that. I think that works really nicely, that bit. So you're basically doing that. I'm going to now rattle through it without talking and kind of do a fast forwarded version just so we can get to the end bit. So yeah, it's going to fast forward now. And there you have it. That's everything finished. We've just sped through, but the idea is the same of positioning stuff, using the layer mask, getting it all lined up. And that's how you do the final image. I hope that was useful. And like I say, if anyone's got any questions, there's a lot of technical issues there that might be tricky. So please get in touch if I can help out. So thank you. So I hope that's been a useful demonstration. We've been through how to create an invisible person in front of a background, moving away from the background, and then photographing bits of the clothes to drop in to complete the illusion. I find it a really fun first step into kind of composite image making, and like I said, for me it kind of opened up a whole world of creativity. You can take elements of the real world and remix them, rebuild them, turn them into whatever you want, which I find really exciting. So hopefully that's been really useful. If you've got any questions, because there very well could be some creative sort of stumbling blocks amongst this where it becomes a little bit awkward, please put in the comment or drop me a message and I'll help out. And any other tutorials where there's anything you want me to cover, let me know. I'm going to be doing extra tutorials on night photography. I'm going to try and create a tutorial where you can have yourself in the image a number of times, so speaking to myself, or 10 versions of myself lined up, which can be quite another quite fun kind of illusion. And then also I'm going to be looking at panoramic photography, so how you can take a few images and join them together. That might be images panning left and right, or up and above and all around as well. That's how I create a lot of my landscape and nature images. They're not single images, they're the result of lots of clicks of the camera. So I'll look at that, how you use your camera to capture the elements, and then how you can manually stitch those elements together in Photoshop. There's quite a lot that's using Photoshop in these tutorials, but you can get a demo you can have a trial version of Photoshop for a while, and then it's a subscription of not that much a month. So if you're into this and you find creatively you really connect with it, which I did, then it's worth a little bit of investment, and if you've got a bit of time on your hands, just playing with it and working out how to use it for yourself. So I hope that's been useful, and thanks for watching.